on YouTube. I've invited everybody to come back on the Zoom.
Ron, how many discussions have we had like that?
We have many, and still don't get a clarification. Go ahead, sir.
All right, and we're back. We need a motion to come back into open session, please, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we leave closed session and further certify that only those matters discussed were pertinent to the motion for closure.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please, Mr. Senna.
Counselor Jackson,
Aye.
Counselor Letterman,
Aye.
Counselor Eby,
Aye.
Counselor Salas,
Aye.
Counselor Cornelius.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now we'll pick up item number 4 is discussion and possible action on the police department reorganization. And that is,
Mayor, if I may start off.
go ahead.
Mayor, one of the things that I'd like to do is really kind of go back and review the tactical plan that we had with Chief Hooker, with Chief Chavez, and kind of solidify that that's the direction that we want the police department to work on. Then I want to go through a practice of looking at his operations, policing theories and whatnot, and go through it and get direction on how we would like to, the police department, what the governing body would like to see the police department look like. And then from there, formulate some action items that would be added to his tactical plan. And then he has some recommendations on how he would reorganize his department to, take on those type of actions.
Okay, I think that sounds wonderful.
So LT?
Chief Chavez,
I call him LT Chief.
LT Chief,
Yeah,
Chief
Lawrence,
LT.
Lawrence, what's Thaddeus Chief.
LT, Chief LT.
I'm gonna take a short break, Mayor, if you don't.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, Council, Manager Dodge, thank you for allowing me to come up here.
We made Chief, we're in a setting, so you got a speaker over there if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's up to you.
I wanted to be up here so I could address everybody because
Okay.
I couldn't see the two counselors from where I was at, so I figured
Because of the
that,
billboard next to it.
yeah, so
We
I
all
figured
felt
I'd stay
well
home.
armed, though.
So I figured I would stand here, and most of the time I like to stand up because I can't sit still anyways.
Chief Chavez, you may want to just move that podium about.
Are you looking
Okay.
at us? It's up to you.
Okay, I'm good here. So, coming before you today, one of the things I have not worked on the tactical plan or anything with you all, and I have reviewed what was implemented under Chief Hooker's administration. So, some of the things that I want to do is I want to hear from you all on what direction you want to see the department going, what your philosophies are, and then I want to be able to give you my philosophies and see where you all want the direction of the department to be also, because it's important that we work in unison to create the product that we want the citizens and tourists to have here in Ruidoso. So I guess, do we open it up at this point to get input? I would like to hear your, hear from you all.
Yeah, the council, if they have any input, questions, or ideas that they'd like to give the chief, please do it at this time.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm not to add, but when I read through this, it seemed like the needs and wants are pretty solid. I mean, I'm most concerned about relocation support and the bullets that follow that. I mean, that has a lot to do with who we get, when we get, and how qualified they are when we get them. And so I'm all for it. I think we did do a lot of work in terms of upgrading entry-level salaries, et cetera, but I'm still concerned about not just the sign-on bonus, but the housing support. I mean, that's, to me, that's the linchpin.
And you're right. We actually, DC Hill and I just literally, while we're sitting here at this council meeting this morning, we're helping out one of our younger officers who's struggling to find housing. He was in a spot, and unfortunately, he was told within the last several weeks that his rent was going to go up substantially because the owner was getting asked by people from out of state if they had housing, and they were telling him, hey, this is what we're willing to pay. If that's what your rent is, this is what we're willing to pay there. And of course, the owner said, hey, if you can't meet that, what they're willing to pay, unfortunately, I'm going to have to take them in. So he's struggling. We've been looking, working together. We have already found several options for him. It's just a matter of getting it in. So you're right. That is a huge crisis that we face here in Ruidoso with our officers.
Go ahead, sir.
This wouldn't be an overnight solution, but some of those lots that we are talking about, if the council wanted, some of those could be designated for
Yep.
our housing.
Yes.
Even if it was temporary, get in here and you can
Yep.
live for however until you find something. I don't know how it would be handled exactly, but everybody I talked to Ryan from the college the other day. They're having trouble recruiting people because of housing.
Yes, sir. Everybody is. And in my first staff meeting that I had, they were speaking about it. So that's whenever I started taking action to try to help them out. But I admire one of the comments by Sergeant Urban. He said, we need to work together to let the public know that these temporary housing or the workforce housing initiative, it's very important for us. And we need to let everybody know that we're not doing it to attract, a lot of people think that the crime rates and stuff are going to go up and we're going to attract the wrong crowds, but that's not the issue. We're looking for solutions to be able to compensate our employees and have quality, qualified employees everywhere, not just for the village, but for the schools, the hospitals, everywhere in the community. It would have a positive impact on everyone if we were able to offer those types of solutions for people coming here.
So Lieutenant, would you say that's the number one deterrent to acquiring officers coming to this area?
A lot of times whenever we are telling people, hey, this is what our benefit package is, they're totally on board with wanting to sign up that day. But then the next conversation is, man, your cost of living up here is so high. Where do you live? How do you make it? Those are some of the questions that we get asked.
I don't know if somebody can refresh me on that particular subdivision that we changed the wording in the land use where it was allowed tiny homes. Do you recall that? It's probably about 3 years ago or so.
What? Oh, the accessory dwelling units
Yes.
in the backyard?
And I believe that it also had the word tiny homes. And
That was up there by Swiss Chalet.
Yeah.
so I wonder if that's something that could be workable if, with the contractor to want that subdivision, that tiny homes could be moved in, and then, of course, they could also be moved out quickly if need be.
That'd be up to the developer. I mean,
Yeah.
that was recently bought and they've done nothing with it.
Right.
Well, that could be a conversation. We might be able to talk with the developer, and just like Councilor Cornelius stated, that particular type of dwelling could be moved in very quickly.
But that's where I think we need the publicity, so there are bound to be some people in town that would like a little bit of extra income. You can have those set up in a hurry.
Yes, I think we have to come up with a united solution for that, not just for the police department, but for, many, many businesses and departments across the board, so that we're not, we're attracting the most qualified people here to help us run our community and be engaged in our community. Any other questions?
Well, I know we're going to do the community policing and all that. That's a given. I don't have anything else. Does anybody else? We can let the chief go on.
I just had a quick question. It was on page 4 of this document. It was on public service aids. I know that's been bantered about, but is that something that you're fully supporting or want to see? Is that lower on your priority list?
So what's at the top of my priority list right now is to get the department accredited, get good sound policies in place, and move forward with that. Outside of that, some of the other initiatives going forward, the PSA position, it's a very, it could be a very beneficial position, but right now I don't think that's an initiative that I want to address immediately. I will address it in the future, but for now we have some other initiatives that we need to take care of that, especially with the culture of policing and the citizens right now. We need to foster a relationship to where we're creating public trust with the department and the village as a whole.
Thank you.
So a lot of the things on here, from the old strategic planning, recruitment and retention, that's always going to be at the top of our priority list, is attracting the most qualified candidates here and opening it up to see who we can attract that will be a good fit for the community in our department. The facility improvement, this is huge because we have some areas right now that if we don't address rather quickly, we could be facing some litigation and liability, and that's the main concern is our holding facility. It's been on my priority list for a while, but right now I want to move forward with trying to address that, the remodel of the booking facility. The cages the holding cells is a better word. The holding cells that we have in there for our booking process, they're not adequate, and the whole booking room needs to be addressed, and it really needs to be updated. So that's going to be one of the things that I'm going to push forward, that I'll in the hopefully the near future I'll be presenting something to you. We'll have to work on a capital projects with that because it's going to take a little bit, but I feel that money spent now is going to save us a lot of money later on down the road. So I know the building is old. There are a lot of cosmetic things that we want to fix, but we do have some things that we really need to address. It's more of a need than a want with some of the issues in there.
Yeah.
The rewriting of the policy and updating the policy manual, that is going to come with the accreditation process. That is high on my priority list. I've already spoken with the representatives from the New Mexico Municipal League and the New Mexico Chiefs of Police Association for the accreditation. We are working right now with them. They are going to provide documents, and I'm hoping to be able to have everything that I need to present it to you on the next agenda, on the next council agenda, so that we can start moving forward and getting a lot of that done immediately, and procedures and policies put in place.
Chief, I remember Chief Gold talking about the accreditation process and stuff, but I forgot how long that took.
It's going to take us about a year. The quicker that we get on board with it, the more things that we can get done. So it's a lengthy process. However, we are ahead of the game because I tried to present it before to push forward with the initiative a couple years ago. So all the files and the standards and everything, they've already been created. So we are ahead of the game. I was working with Scott Chambers, who is the accreditation manager for the state, and he had me going in the right, or has me going in the right direction. So we are ahead of the game. Typically it takes anywhere from 1 year to 18 months to be a recognized agency. I feel confident that if we have creating these procedures, we'll have it done in about a year.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Mr. Mayor, Chief, excuse me, I was looking at some old notes, but in previous discussions under facilities improvement, there was a discussion on securing a better evidence room. And my concern with that is equally with liability, because I understand it's fractionated, the vault's full, then we have these kind of standalones that may or may not meet requirements and regulatory requirements.
Yes, sir. So that is on our priority list also. The evidence room is key, and we do have a process right now that is working for us. Our evidence tech is doing destruction orders and creating room, and I feel that after we get into the legislation with the marijuana issue, we're going to be able to destroy a lot of other evidence that's in there and make a lot more room. So we do have some options that would keep us going for a while. However, that is something that needs to be addressed also, is the evidence room. But that would be a future project for sure that is on the priority list.
Mayor,
Thank you.
Council, I think, from my perspective, the time is right to start considering a brand-new facility. And, if state police wants to continue cohabitating with us, that we start that discussion
Yeah.
of creating a brand-new facility, because, that building served us well, but, it is a reused facility, and I think it's time to really look at starting to conceptually talk about building a brand-new facility and making it, one that's right, as opposed to trying to retrofit one.
I agree. My love for that is waned many times ago.
And I agree with that. Like Manager Dodge said, that building has served us right for a lot of years, but it was retrofitted from a bank to a police department. So, you look on the outside of it, the building's beautiful. Everybody comes, it's a great building, it's beautiful. However, some of the layouts inside of it, you can tell it was not designed for a police department. So there's a lot of issues with that. So I do agree with that. Thank you for bringing that up. I would be, whatever we got to do to get that initiative rolling forward, that's a great idea.
Mr. Mayor, I would second that, because even if you go there as John Q. Public, you're kept outside or in a little atrium.
Yeah,
And it'd be for security reasons. I'm not, haggling with that, but I'm just saying, most places would have an area where you would enter, you would already be in a secured area, police department around you. Here you have an open atrium and a vault looking at you in the face, and you're right, it doesn't, and people, so then you're kind of sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to appear, and then you go from there, and that's not very professional. I'm sure it gets to you.
Yes, and it's the public's building, and unfortunately, it's not inviting to the public whenever they go in there.
Okay, I think we need to start looking at that.
So the next item on there was public service, public safety for the 911 positions and code enforcement. We're working with those right now. They're talking about the public service aides, their responsibilities, and unfortunately, one of the ideas is that somebody comes to Ruidoso, gets trained, and moves forward. But I think that we have put a dent into that philosophy with the pay plan that we have. As soon as we get people attracted and get them hired, I believe that we're very competitive with our wages now, and we will be able to retain those employees that we get. And as far as the uniform, and those goals, those things have been changed. We are now dressed with our Class A or Class B uniforms. Before we had an appearance with the outer vest on. I know that there was a lot of complaints generated that, the officers look like tactical officers or SWAT officers out on the street, with everything on the outside of it. Since I've taken this position, I've been approached by several members of the community that love the uniform back, the original appearance of what an officer, in their words, what an officer should look like. And I think that's great if we're generating that support from the public already and that perception. I think we are going to continue with that. That was one of the first things that I did address, that we will continue wearing our uniforms. The village personnel policy update, I mean, we work with you all religiously to execute those policies and make sure that our policies will mirror what the village is putting out. So that way we're all on the same page and we're showing unity with that.
We're right ahead.
Speaking with that, Chief, with the ordinances, I just, and I know that we have our community is spread out and you're down officers, but I don't see that we're following ordinances a lot, especially if you don't think maybe as a group that it's that important. And I'm like feeding animals, like when somebody calls for disturbance on a house, short-term rental, over and over, nothing gets done. And I just think that if we are going to have these ordinances, that they need to be followed for residents and for tourists alike.
Yes, ma'am. I completely agree with you on that. And I can assure you that those issues will be addressed as an education, because a lot of the officers, they think, well, it's a code issue and they're not educated on a lot of things. So I've had officers having to go speak to somebody about, a garage sale sign or something like
Right.
that they think, well, that's not law enforcement related, but we're all on the same team. And one of the things that needs to be implemented is education of our officers so that they know exactly what they can and can't do and address those issues as a whole. So that way we're all working on the same page.
Right.
So some of my goals, I've already talked about a lot of these things in here, but one of the things that's on top of the priority list is community policing. I know everybody wants to take that initiative, and right now with the society, unfortunately, it's an us against them, culture. But we need to develop the community policing aspect so that way our citizens and tourists know that what our job is and what we're here for. Police leaders, community members, and elected officials, we all play a crucial part in the development of this strategy. And we need to...
For a minute, Chief, we're kind of going into the last section. Since we just talked about personal policy, let's let Zach talk about the...
Okay.
Before we go into the new goals.
Perfect, okay.
And the reason that I want to do that, Mayor, is, we're going through a process of rewriting personnel policy, and at the same time, we're looking at the SOPs as it relates to the police department, and where some of it can mirror each other, and we need to try to make as much consistency as possible. There's some laws that are specific to our police personnel that we want to make sure that we're on the same page with. So I'd like to have this discussion, and then as we move on to discuss the new goals and objectives, especially as it's related to the SOP and personnel policy, I want to make sure as each one of the policies that are being approved by the police department, that they tie directly back to the organization, and that the mayor and council, we're going to go through a process of making sure that every one of those procedures is reviewed and approved by the council as we move forward.
Because we have no idea what's being
Yeah.
done over there.
And I just think that it's important that, from the mayor and council's perspective, especially if you get a complaint that said, there was excessive use of force. Well, what exactly occurred? So as we look at that policy that's specific to that, the mayor and council's informed on that, and then, it gives you a better understanding of the operations of the police department. And I was just using that as an example, but, it may be a response to a domestic violence, or why was that police unit running code down the center of the street, and those type of things, so that when you run into it, you're aware of what the practices are. So, but specifically to the personnel policy, I think there's three areas in law that I want to make sure that there's an understanding of, and then we build off the personnel policy from there. So if we can hold on a minute on your future goals that you're proposing, and then Zach, if you could give your presentation at this point.
Tim, do you want me to sit here or?
Whatever you want, Zach,
Okay, if you guys are okay, I'll
wherever
just.
you're comfortable.
Okay. So, several days ago, I was meeting with Tim and he asked me if I would like to give this presentation. And I jumped at the opportunity because it's something that is very important to the operations of, the personnel for the village. And I think I agree with Tim that it's good for you guys to know, because if any of these issues come up, it's confusing and it can cause stress, on why the administration or the management is doing what they're doing. And so last Friday we met and Tim said, well, why don't you explain to me how you intend to make this presentation? And attached to the day before, I'd sent to Ron some briefs about the cases that Tim mentioned, that there are three areas of law or three cases that kind of support this area of law. So I just started because I just think from the beginning to where we are now, and I started talking to Tim and everybody in the group. So in 1966, there was a case called Miranda. Everybody knows about Miranda from T.J. Hooker and all the other TV shows that, you get Mirandized. And Tim said, no, stop. You're not approaching this in the right way. What we're doing is we want to inform the council of where we are today and how it all affects and what we do when dealing with personnel, particularly in the police department. So and Tim guided me into starting out with Laudermill, which I think everybody knows. And all of these cases and what we're dealing with is because you're a public employer, and all of this stuff comes directly from the Bill of Rights, the 4th, 5th, and 14th Amendments, to talk about due process and a person's right not to incriminate themselves and their rights to be represented by an attorney under certain circumstances. And in any situation when you're dealing with public employees, it's if you're in an administrative proceeding or a criminal investigation, it's the government that's actually talking to you, even if you're talking about in a water department or an department that's not the police department. If there's an administrative investigation going on, it's still the government that could potentially be compelling a water department person to incriminate themselves. So, but back to Laudermill, that's the one that applies generally to everybody. And what that case basically says is that in public employment, you have a property right. There's no dispute under the law, you have a property right to that job. And if your employer, the government, is going to impose some sort of punishment on you, you have a right to present your case. So in Laudermill, I'm pretty sure all of us, we've been in executive session where we're talking about particular cases, and you guys get that Laudermill is an opportunity for where the government, the village, through the HR or through the director or through the manager presents, the allegations against the person in an administrative proceeding and gives that person an opportunity to refute or present evidence on why adverse action shouldn't be taken. And then depending on the outcome of that, then if the village moves forward with adverse action, then there's another opportunity for a post-termination hearing. So it's basically, and all that goes back to your due process rights, because if there's a threat of something being taken away from you, that you have an opportunity to refute that and possibly, present a case on why it shouldn't happen. And as long as the village can show that they were given due process, and due process basically boils down to notice. This is what we're proposing. Based on these things, we're proposing this adverse action. That would be your notice and an opportunity to be heard. Please present yourself on this date at this time to, if you wish to be heard on the matter. So due process is met there. Of course, due process, notice and opportunity is the question becomes how much process is due, and it depends on the circumstances. In an employment situation that we deal with. Typically, it's the notice, the written notice, and an opportunity for the meeting, and then potentially a post-meeting. So that's Laudermill, and that's the one that usually comes up in adverse administrative actions. And then you go back and to another case from the 60s called Garrity, where this one, Garrity was a police chief in a New Jersey town, and he was accompanied by 4 or 5 other police officers that were wrapped up in an investigation on a ticket fixing case. So they were being charged criminally, and they were forced to incriminate themselves in an interview, and that self-incrimination was used against them in their criminal prosecution, and they were convicted, and then they took it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, hold on a minute, they have those rights not to be compelled to testify against yourself apply in these circumstances. And so what that does now, when
Criminal setting.
yeah, in a criminal setting. So if you have a hearing in a personnel administrative matter, for example, let's say that there's an accusation that somebody in the water department is selling drugs to the other employees. And the director says, or the manager, in a situation like that, it would be all hands on deck, if there are serious allegations of a crime like that. So if you're in the administrative investigation with that employee, and you say, for example, listen, this is a voluntary deal. There's been some allegations. You don't have to answer these questions. Blah blah blah. And we're not good. It's not going to affect your employment. So we've been told that you're selling drugs. Depending on how it goes down, if he says, I've been selling drugs, I can't imagine that type of scenario, but it's foreseeable that somebody makes a confession. But if they've been told that this is voluntary, then they're not being compelled to testify against themselves or to incriminate themselves. On the other hand, if you're having a meeting like that and you say, listen, there's some serious allegations. If you don't cooperate here, we're going to fire you. Well, now you've basically compelled them because they're going to, I have to answer now. And so that, that's that's the whole Garrity thing, is that if you're going to compel somebody to answer, then
Those answers can't be taken over to criminal setting.
that's exactly right. So if you say, hey, this is all voluntary, and the guy spills his guts, then whatever he said can be used against him in the criminal proceeding. If you say, if you are forced to comply, and if you don't, we're going to fire you, and the guy says, okay, I sold the drugs. Well, you're fired for violating the policy, but we compelled you to incriminate yourself, so that confession cannot be used in the criminal prosecution.
And this goes for all employees or just police officers?
It applies across the board, because at that point, even the director, or if it's the village manager, it's still the government compelling that self-incrimination.
So let's just say hypothetically, we've seen this on police departments all over. Like the police officers that handcuffed the guy to the front of the cruiser and beat the crap out of him and then took him in. So you come to them and say, we're compelling you to tell us, okay, you're fired, but then there's no charges for assault and battery or any of any of that stuff can be charged against them.
Zach, real quick,
Seems like a load of crap.
in the Peace Officers Bill of Rights, so I think you need to tie it back into that.
Yeah.
Since we're talking directly about, the police department and how Garrity applies to the police
Yeah.
officers and how it can be carried over in a criminal.
And so since that Garrity case that does apply to government employees across the board, states started adopting what is commonly referred to as the police officers Bill of Rights. And New Mexico is one of the states that has adopted it. And in our state, it's called the New Mexico Peace Officers Employer-Employee Relations Act. And it's basically the Garrity case written out into a statute. And it basically says, these are the steps. If you're going to start an administrative investigation on a police officer, these are their rights and these are the steps that you have to take. And essentially, it's a notice, an opportunity to be heard situation, and it lays out the ground rules of, how much time you can interrogate them, where the interrogation takes place, so that you're not, and I've been thinking about this, and I talked to Lawrence. Lawrence was very generous with his time the other day because I've been trying to figure out all this. That's why I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm in a law school exam trying to, because I've never really dealt with the Garrity stuff. So it's not like something that, and Tim has allowed me to do this presentation, which I appreciate because, Dina would have come in here and been, she's an old hand at this stuff and laid it out. So I'm kind of like regurgitating in a law school fashion. But so Lawrence chatted me up for a long time and the light bulbs went off. So then that got me off track. Where was I?
How it applies to the peace officer bill of rights.
That's what I was talking. I was trying to figure out, and I did some general internet research on why specifically did these state legislatures create a law enforcement bill of rights from the Garrity case when Garrity really applies to everybody across the board. And all I can think of, and Lawrence kind of led me down this path, is that police officers are held to a higher standard, and they're the ones that are going to be in a situation where they're, have the apparent illegal authority to handcuff somebody, put them on the car, and rough them up. That's not going to happen at the water department there's an appearance that, they've got the badge and all that stuff, even though they may be violating not only policy, but potentially the, criminal statutes if it's really that bad. So that is the law enforcement, the peace officers' Bill of Rights that says these are the steps that have to be taken, as opposed to, your typical administrative investigations in other departments where there's not, the potential for a crime having occurred is very rare, and that's a totally hypothetical situation about the water department and the selling drugs. You can see it potentially happening, but on a day-to-day basis where these guys are dealing with the public, the roughs, with potentially violent people, and they've got to be protecting themselves, and somebody could very easily get hurt. So I suppose that's why 15 states or however many at this point have adopted that Bill of Rights for police officers.
When you're dealing with Garrity, it holds in favor of the employees, but it also allows you to identify administrative policies that have been violated, but those actions, because they're compelled, don't carry over into the criminal side against the employee. So, it's a management tool to allow you to make sure that, policy's been adhered to, at the same time not putting the employee in the position of self-incrimination.
Right.
A criminal proceeding and an administrative proceeding can be happening at the same time, but the information under the investigations can't cross over.
And that goes to the whole question of compelling somebody. So if there's an allegation that somebody roughs somebody up and the chief or the deputy chief are investigating the potential policies violations, and they say, you are going to answer these questions. I order you to answer these questions, and if you don't, we're gonna fire you. Then that is, you're being compelled to answer, because what else are you gonna do? And if you don't, you're gonna get fired. So if I then say, based on the chief or whoever's doing the investigation saying, you're going to answer, and if you don't, you're gonna get fired. If I then say, okay, I intentionally roughed that guy up. He hadn't done anything at the time, but I know him from the streets, and he got what was coming to him. Well, you just confessed to, among other things, assault and battery probably, right? And whatever else. But if you've been compelled in that administrative investigation to incriminate yourself, that can't be carried over into the criminal prosecution side. Of course, the criminal prosecution side, they're going to be doing their own investigation. If there's video or whatever else, they can still go forward with the prosecution. It's just that one statement you made against yourself in the administrative investigation or interview can't be used against you. So that's that. And so when I was talking to the chief the other day, I was like, help me understand, because Tim keeps talking about Miranda, the Miranda rights and lumping it all in with this stuff. And I said, is he just, I don't get it. And he said, well, basically, it's just, Garrity is basically Miranda for an administrative hearing. You have a right to remain silent. You have a right to have an attorney represent you, all these things. So that's my spiel. You guys have any questions? It literally boils down to notice an opportunity to be heard and whether or not the person was compelled to testify against themselves or incriminate themselves.
So let's just say, not so hypothetical, that Bryant they would have said, we want your password to your computer, and he would have given it to him. He would have not been charged criminally. Is that what you're saying? They couldn't use that evidence against him?
Well, given a password and then they go do whatever they do with the password, they're going to collect evidence. If they said, did you do these things? And he said, after being told, you're going to answer these questions, and if we don't like the answers, we're going to fire you, or whatever the answers are, you're going to lose your job, potentially lose your job. Then he's in a situation where he's been compelled to say, I did it.
So he couldn't be criminally charged for that?
He could be criminally charged. He just, that statement and in that circumstance
They'd
could
have to
not be.
find other ways to prove it.
Right.
Yeah, I think like an example of that, Mayor, is that if we're doing an administrative process and we said, officer, were you using your village-issued laptop to access pornography? Yes, and I did use it because I was wanting to do a search to see if whatever. And for him admitting that he did use it, the investigator on the criminal side couldn't get that report that we would have administratively, use it against him criminally.
Okay. John?
Yeah, that's right. That's the fruits of that confession.
Lynn's case where he handcuffed him, beat him up, and we fire him, but we can't criminally prosecute him. He's fired. When the people under the qualified immunity go after him, are we still liable on the qualified immunity thing?
I mean,
Because he was our employee when it happened.
yeah, but you can he could still be prosecuted for that. Though it's just that
It's not, no double jeopardy rule there.
right.
It's just the information that he gave that was pertaining to that one.
Is only used in the administrative side.
None
But
of
there's
the other
another set of
evidence.
people that are doing a criminal investigation, or there's another side of that's the criminal as opposed to the administrative. And the criminal investigation can go down the path that criminal investigations go down.
And so we'd still have the liability
Yeah.
for his actions.
Okay.
And, part of the reason that I wanted to bring this up, and, Chief is gonna be talking about, some reorganization, and as it applies to Laudermill and, property rights and things of that nature, I think that's important that we have an understanding of that and what is adverse and what isn't adverse. But then as we move forward as well, we're gonna be inviting, employees to do the right thing and act right, but I believe it's important to understand, the Garrity rights and how you actually engage an officer. And it's, quite a bit different than how you would engage any other employee because of the Garrity rights and the Peace Officer Employer Act. So, I just want to make sure that we all understand that as we start looking at policy and proposing to change how we're going to handle the police department moving forward. Chief? You probably want to talk about target letter and whatnot too. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, Garrity. No, Zach, that was a good presentation. And just summing it up real, anything you find out in a criminal investigation, you can use in an administrative investigation. Anything you find out in an administrative investigation, you can't divulge that information to the criminal investigation. So, in a nutshell, yep.
Would it be fair to say that there's a China wall between civil and criminal investigation units? Because when I sat on the licensing board as a complaint chair, the investigation that we did initially before the board was more of an investigative measure where the individual was allowed time to respond, but whatever the findings of fact were there, if there was a concern, it went to a total different division, under the criminal division, different attorney, it all started over again.
I would have thought that, and I asked Chief Chavis about that the other day because it seems logical. If I'm in an administrative interview with you, compelling you to potentially incriminate yourself, and you do, and then I'm part of the criminal investigation as well, come on. And Lawrence said, no, that's not necessarily the case. There are times when it's the same people doing the same investigation. The difference is that if I'm now if I've done the administrative side and you admitted you incriminated yourself, and then I turn my hat around and now I'm doing the criminal stuff, I can't use that. I can't present that evidence to the jury unless I got a confession out of you in the criminal investigation. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's good. I mean,
And if you're doing it administratively, more than likely you'd conflict it out unless there wasn't another agency that would take it.
and that's exactly correct. So if they're doing a criminal investigation and they're read Miranda, at that point, you know, they can have counsel, or they could say, hey, I'm not going to answer anything that's going to self-incriminate me in the criminal investigation. But then you read them Garrity, and, you know, like you said, if you're compelling them to answer questions and they say, well, no, I don't want to answer that question, at that point, you know, depending on the allegations, they can be written up for insubordination for not complying with a administrative investigation up to and including termination. So that's where that goes with that.
Aaron, you want to add something? You look like you wanted to grab that mic.
No, I'm good right now. I'm gonna wait for the chief to finish his, and if I add something, if he invites me to.
No, that's, does anybody have any other specific questions regarding Garrity or Miranda?
No.
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Zach, you did a good job.
So now do you want to be a criminal defense attorney?
What's that?
Now do you want to be a criminal defense attorney?
Well, I told the chief the other day I'd love to go to work for the DA just a couple of years to learn all that procedure stuff.
It gets tricky dealing with a regular employee, but when you start dealing with a police officer, it's even a little bit more, you know, and we need to make sure that, you know, it's like, I've talked to, you know, Zach and Dina and Steve, you know, the three attorneys that represent us on HR issues. And I told them, you know, you guys are the engineers that are looking over that minefield, and you got to guide us through that. So before we take a step, we want to make sure we're being legally advised before we blow a leg off. Because it gets tricky. Even the procedures under, you know, how you handle an investigation. So we need to make sure we're hiring and doing a good job when we do hire. So we're not running into people that are taking advantage of that type of opportunity.
Okay, I think we've covered it. Do you need anything you want to say, Darren?
No, sir, I'm good.
Okay, what do we want to go into next? The org chart, or is this a little different than what I was thinking we were moving in? Is that where you're at now?
Okay, yes, the current work chart is actually several pages. The last, on mine, it's from page 78 to page 82. And it shows the initial, the chief, deputy chief, and then two lieutenants, one over patrol, and then one over special services, which includes criminal investigations, code enforcement, and dispatch. If you go to page 79, that is the current organizational chart for the patrol side. You have one lieutenant and 3 shifts, day shift, swing shift, and graveyard shift. If you, on page 80, under Department 45, you have the Special Services Lieutenant, which was over criminal investigations, the detectives, the records custodian, and the evidence tech. The next page was consolidated dispatch. You have a supervisor.
I don't think you really.
I don't have any of those.
Oh,
We're-
you just have to pop through them.
I think you just need to look at page 78, that.
Okay.
Your whole department.
Okay.
on that,
What's your
so you're talking about on the org chart, you just click on them?
Yeah, you just kind of pop them up and there's one document of 5. And he was kind of popping, these are the old.
The old ones, yes, sir. Those were the old ones, and that was just the layout of the old organizational chart was what I went
I
through.
was looking at the new one.
Okay, and then the last several that I went over, it just broke it down division by division with the chain of command is all it did. So if you look at the original one on page 78, it gives you a complete overview of the entire department.
Of the current, what you're talking about going to, or?
So the current one on page 77 of the documents in there, that is my proposed reorganization of the department. Which
Okay,
would,
so the office fleet manager, do we have that person right now?
yes, Miriam is that, she's the administrative secretary, but she's over
She's the fleet manager.
a fleet. Yeah, she maintains all the vehicles as far as the oil changes and the financial
Records keeper.
portions. Yeah, the financial portions of the vehicles. Yes.
When we look at the whole thing, Mayor, the only thing that changes is that accreditation lieutenant.
Well, it just says accreditation manager, so
Yeah, but
what
that's
is an accreditation manager? Are they, because I don't see the org chart, everything else goes down from the special services lieutenant. I don't see what the accreditation manager does.
It should be lieutenant.
It should be, yes, sir, it should be accreditation lieutenant, that position there. So that position would be solely responsible for managing our accreditation process for the police department, working with the New Mexico Municipal League and the New Mexico Police Chiefs Association to get our department in the right direction for accreditation. Once those philosophies are implemented, they would be directly in charge of maintaining all of the files and the standards for the police department. That means that if we write a policy, regardless of which policy it is, we have to keep a standard and we have to show that our department is operating underneath those standards, and we have to show examples. And by showing examples, you have to go through and literally pull out a case. So let's talk about, I'll use handcuffing. So if we have a policy that says we will double lock our handcuffs each time we arrest somebody and assure that there's adequate room between the cuffs and their wrists, that has to be documented, and we have to show in the standards that we are complying with that policy in order to be accredited. So there's a whole lot of different standards that go through it with it. I'm using that one as one particular example of the things that they would be doing.
Chief, talk about TRIA and then how the New Mexico Municipal League has a revised version, and then how many standards policies are actually part of the process.
Okay, so CALIA is a national recognized law enforcement accreditation association. That there's New Mexico State Police, Farmington PD, Hobbs PD, and I want to say, I believe it's Los Lunas. There's not very many agencies in our state that are CALIA accredited. CALIA is a much tougher standard to meet. So the New Mexico Police Chiefs Association and the New Mexico Municipal League, they wanted to mirror a program that would be the same quality as CALIA, but they watered it down to where it meets our standards, and they're recognized by the New Mexico Municipal League. So that's the New Mexico Accreditation Program. That is run by the New Mexico Chiefs of Police Association. So there are 280 standards that have to be met in order to be recognized. That sounds like a lot of work, but some of the policies that you write, you actually hit a couple of different standards, in just one policy. However, the maintenance of that, they do recertifications every 3 years. So once you're You initially go through, they send their inspection team to your agency. They start inspecting all your policies, your standards, they make sure your files are correct, and then they do what's called a mock run to make sure that everything is going in the right direction. And through the whole process, they work with you. You know, they don't just say, hey, here's a book, read it, you know, make sure you hit everything. They actually come down and work with you through the entire process to make sure that we're going in the right direction. What that does is it covers us with the New Mexico Self-Insurance Fund. We actually get a percentage off of our insurance for that once we are accredited agency. Mr. Dodge, is that all the info? I think I hit everything with that. So that's what it is. That's what the New Mexico accreditation process is. It's a very intense process, but it creates a very professional department because you don't have no leg to wiggle around and tailor policies that would just fit the individual. You have to hit the standards, so you don't have you're not liable for tailoring a policy or saying, well, we want to be able to drive as fast as we want to, so we're going to create the policy to let us drive that fast. We're held to standards in that, so that way it's across the board and they're recognized by the New Mexico Self-Insurance Fund.
And so, I mean, like AIs, who's going to handle that?
So once I get get the staff reorganized, obviously DC Hill will be, I'll send him and the lieutenants to Internal Affairs Investigation School. If anything below one of the lieutenants, they have to go into an IA on an employee, they will handle that. If it goes to an IA of one of the lieutenants, the deputy chief will handle that IA. So we'll have those processes. And I'm certified as an IA investigator, so, hope it would never come to that. But if it happened to go to the DC, then I would be conducting that IA.
Well, I was just figuring, since we had an accreditation manager, if that was something that they would be in charge of. So you're saying that they will be sent to training for that?
Yes, sir. They would be sent to training.
What does CID stand for?
Criminal Investigation Division.
Okay.
And IA is in.
Internal Affairs Investigator.
I thought it was administrative investigation. Not AI?
Internal Affairs, yep.
Internal Affairs, okay.
Yep.
I got it backwards, sorry.
So in the cop world, if you say you're an IA investigator, nobody else talks to you.
You lunch by yourself.
Yeah.
Right to
Don't have
privacy.
for you. Okay.
Chief, when they do the survey, then their findings are published to you, and then they give you a period of time for corrective action. And are they layered by what I would call venal sins and cardinal sins, or how does that work?
As far as the standards of the accreditation?
Right.
Yes, sir. They are. They give you like I used a minute ago, they don't just give you the book and read it and figure it out. They give you the book, and as you're going down, you have several standards that you have to hit in each policy, and it lines it out. So like the example I used with the handcuffing technique, they're going to make that required is you double lock and assure that there's adequate room between the wrists. Those types of things. So if they lay that out for you, you have to physically show in a report that you are following those standards.
So with the accreditation there, you talked about having a manager. Of course, you have them working with you during the process to get your accreditation, but it sounds like you said every 3 years that you go through a renewal process. So in that, it sounds like that you kind of essentially go through an accreditation audit type. So in showing your proof of, say, for instance, with your handcuffs, and then you just mentioned driving, so I'm assuming that you have a certain speed limit that you can only reach in certain situations. So is at every call, every handcuff, everything documented and kept in a file for that audit, or is it just?
So the reason that we would have to have an accreditation manager is because they're going to know what standards need to be met. And as soon as a report comes out or an incident happens that would be used for that, they need to assure that the officers are following policy. So every 3 years, they would have to produce documents to show that we are continuing to follow these policies and that we are hitting every standard in the accreditation process. So it's a very time-consuming job, and there's no way possible to do that job and hit patrol work and hit, your other responsibilities. So it's a very important, very crucial element for the success of an accreditation program in a police department.
And it takes a lot of maintenance.
Yes, sir. It's constant maintenance. It's the process is basically a living, breathing document, changing all the time because you have to keep up with legislation, what's coming down the pipe that Santa Fe is going to want us to do. So those types of things, it's a very time-consuming job, but it's a very, very important position for a police department to be accredited.
Okay.
So with the violations, let's say something happens as far as an officer or anybody within the department violates one of those policies, how is that dealt with?
So as policy comes out, the department will be educated on the development of the policy. So at that point, that would the department down the ranks would be educated on these policies, and if there is a policy violation, depending on what that violation is, it could be handled at the mid-management level or the first-line supervisor level as a sergeant, or it would have to go up to a lieutenant. But just for example, yesterday we had a complaint, gave it to the DC. He looked into the complaint, watched the video. We figured out the allegations and we moved forward with it. It was just somebody that was upset over a traffic citation, but we were able to show that the officer did not do anything wrong or the allegations, that the guy was alleging.
So it's not good.
If they did do something wrong, they'd have a corrective action on this.
And would that be documented and then also be submitted in your audit?
Yes, sir. Because we would show those corrections. So if we have, somebody that didn't lock the handcuffs and, now a guy's saying that he can't feel, some of the nerves or there was nerve damage or something like that, absolutely, it would be documented in that standard. And then we would also show that we conducted remedial training over that violation.
So it's continuing education for cops, basically.
Yes, sir.
We need that for builders too, don't we?
Yep.
So, go ahead.
Well, in medicine, we call it a standard of care, and it sounds like the same thing for you. We have Joint Commission, and you have this standard that you must follow.
Yes, sir.
Our director of nursing takes care of the bulk of it, I would say. And yours is under this new manager, which is a law enforcement officer.
Yes, sir. Certified law enforcement officer. Yeah, it'll be a lieutenant position.
Looks like DC Hill has his hands full.
So one other, close to the last questions I have is where's the hiring going to be located,
So
bottleneck?
I'm going to push for the hiring to be in-house. We have competent employees that can handle that position. I have every confidence in them that they will be able to manage that and take on that task.
Will it
And
be under which lieutenant?
the accreditation manager will be his own lieutenant. It'll be a lieutenant position. And the reason for it is if a new policy is created, he can push it down immediately down the ranks. And
Talking about, we need a bunch of cops. So we're going out the world over. We're trying to find the cops that want to come to the community. Who's going to do the interviews? I know we'll have human resources, but then we always had a bottleneck in the police department.
I get what you're saying. I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question as you presented it. So the way that'll work is it'll come down from the DC position, and then we will use the patrol lieutenant to to help us with the selection, and obviously work with human resources and, the establishment of a hiring board on a promotional board, hiring promotional board. But yes, sir, we will work within the ranks to accommodate that from the initial reviewing of the applications to the background process to everything else. But, we'll work in unison with HR to make sure that we're not violating any hiring practices or anything.
Or bottlenecking it.
One of the things that we've done, last week, Mayor, we spent the whole Friday afternoon here, and we started to work on the promotional policy. That's probably one of the first policies that we'll be presenting to council. It really streamlines the process and doesn't handcuff the department and trying to get their positions backfilled and whatnot. And it gives the chief some latitude to make some decisions. I think what was in place before really tied the department's hands. So I think that's what we start with.
Yes, sir. So we're, through the streamline of this process, after I was able to work with the last administration and there at the end implement some things, and we were going from, because typically before the background process was lasting from the time they turned in to the time we were actually making a job offer. Sometimes it was lasting as long as 4 months, but now we're trying to make a turnaround of a month on those, and that's including the background and everything else that goes along with it.
So I'm looking at this org chart, the new one proposed. We're looking at roughly 43 positions, and we're currently at 26. Is that right? I just counted.
I think it only adds one.
Yeah, it only adds one.
I'm just counting all the squares, or does one person do multiple titles?
Didn't look like it.
Well, some of them are like in animal control, and we looked at the 26, we're basically just talking about the police department. So this one actually is, also looking at your telecommunication officers and your animal control.
Oh, so is that the difference?
Yes.
Yes.
So the total department, this is fully staffed?
Fully staffed, there would be 43 positions that would include civilian staff, dispatchers, ACO, detectives, everybody across the board. So yes, you are correct. That's how many staff work underneath the police department.
Financial impact?
The financial impact of this proposed position would have an impact of $85,000 plus the fringe benefits of roughly 25% on top of that. But through attrition and promotions, we would be able to recoup that money later on down the road. And then as you're promoting, your sergeants wouldn't be making, they wouldn't be starting out at your topped out wage. They'd be able to work their way up through that.
Okay, and we've seen that work in other departments. As people retired or whatever, we brought them back in. So when you say 25%, do we have a ballpark on that number? Because I think it's going to be bigger than the 85, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So in a round number, are we talking about a full impact of $250,000? Not that big?
Not that big. Not that big.
It's 85 times, 1.25 on average with the benefits.
And that's all over
You're going to look at about 106, somewhere in that neighborhood.
1,000?
Yep, right in that neighborhood. But with that, the other important thing that you have to consider is the impact on liability that we would be eliminating, because we've dodged the bullet for a long time without having proper processes in place. And with this movement, it would assure us that we're following all of our procedures, and it would eliminate any liability in the future for the village of Ruidoso.
Okay, and I think where I was coming up with the other figure was we were talking about, just for the manager, assistance on uniforms, rather than the $100 a what?
$100 a month.
A month, and that's not gonna do it. But then we were talking about some sort of housing assistance or whatever, maybe that's where I was getting some of the numbers, but have we got any of those numbers put together yet, or are we just right now in theory or in idea?
Right now, we're in theory, and, we are going to look at some of that. And, I think that's something that we need to evaluate and take a look at. But, that uniform allowance and some of the equipment is covered, some of it isn't. And, we need to evaluate that and see.
Because I thought it strange that, they bought their own handcuffs. And if I'm wrong, point it out.
No, you're not wrong.
And then, like your belt, I understand some of those things may be a little more personal.
Not the handcuffs,
But the handcuffs I wouldn't think, or,
any of the tools.
Because we haven't had, up until about 2 years ago, we literally had to furnish our own weapon, our own handgun. So up until about 2 years ago, we were buying our own guns, buying, all of our leather gear, all the gear that we have down here, we were purchasing out of pocket, plus the uniforms. And I'll tell you what, I hadn't purchased a uniform in a while, so I just purchased one within the last 2 weeks, and I was kind of shocked. By the time I purchased the uniform and got it, tailored and everything else, I spent a little over a couple $100 for it.
on a shirt and pants?
Yes, sir. And that was just the shirt and pants. That was no equipment. And whenever you get bigger guys like DC Lacey, that price goes up a little more.
You have to go to police tent and awning and have them
So,
measured.
but yes, sir, I spent right at $200 just for a pair of pants and a shirt. So the and that doesn't include any of the equipment. Fortunately, I've been doing this for 20 years and have had the same duty rig since then. But up until about 2 years ago, we had to supply our holster and our handgun that went inside of that holster. Which included mags. The only thing that we were supplemented with was bullets. So if you carried a 357 or something, the department would order 357 bullets, and they would issue your bullets to go qualify. But outside of that, we were responsible for actually providing the weapon. And if you go down, and get a little further into that, if an officer gets involved in a shooting, they're losing their weapon for a while. It's going up to the lab. The state police will take it into evidence, till the investigation is done. So now you have an officer losing their personal weapon. But fortunately, now that we provide the weapons, they take the department weapon and we're able to go into the armory and issue them another weapon. So then they're back in battle, so to speak. But yes, there's a lot of things that we have to purchase on our own.
How do we pick the weapon? I'm just curious.
That was Sergeant Minner and Corporal Bailey did an extensive study. Them guys are gun guys. I'm one of the guys that they say, hey, pull the trigger and it'll shoot, and you can aim it and it'll hit the target. But them guys can tell you ballistics. They can tell you, the nomenclature, everything else that goes along with the selection of a weapon. And they did do an in-depth study to the point that they shot some stuff at those gel blocks, and they can tell you penetration and
What type of bullet?
everything. So with that, they even went as far as taking their data to select what grain of bullet that the department carries. Because you might think, well, what does that matter? What difference does that make? What kind of grain of bullet that we carry? However, if we're in a situation and we have over penetration of a suspect and it hits, somebody else and it kills them, then we're in liability. So these guys actually did a very good study to even include what type of ammunition and what grain of bullet that we carry in our weapons.
Supported by a police agency, some kind of brotherhood or something or other that you go through and that they have done all the testing, and then you can see these are are approved, and then we go in and select from that, or is it just a big?
They actually gathered data from New Mexico State Police, I know, and from the FBI. And they used their data to formulate a decision of what we carry. New Mexico State Police carries the same weapon that we do.
What
So
do we have?
it's a Smith & Wesson 9mm.
M&P.
What's that?
M&P, the M&P is military and police, so it's a Smith & Wesson M&P. It's a 9mm cartridge for military and police.
Okay, good. All right.
Mayor, the next discussion that I'd like to have, and, as we're going through the process of hiring, the police chief, one of the things that, came forward to me and Ron and Zach, we had a discussion on, is that I think that there's a little bit of disconnect of what the governing body wants to see as policing compared to, some of the practices that were occurring. And, and as we look at it, do we want to see, saturation patrols? Do we want to see DWIs? Do we want to see heavy ticketing? Do we want to see, are those type of actions that you want? Or do you want to see more people out on the street, friendly walking, doing those type of things? So I want to have a brief discussion around that as well. What is the governing body's vision of what they want to see that police department look like?
I'll start off.
And I just want to say that, Mayor, because, when you look at a police officer that's patrolling I-40, policing action should look much different than a resort community.
Right, I agree, but I would like to start off with saying we need a few saturation patrols to get people under control on Hall Road, on Wingfield, that we've been messing with for years. We have other areas that we need to look at that are cut-throughs, like Kirkland Street, right off of Meacham, that people cut through like they do on Buckner, that the residents over there are calling. You have the hill that you go up and down, and they're afraid that people are flying over them. Those are locals. And so they're wanting speed bumps. Do we want to be in a community full of speed bumps? And then we talk to the street guys, and they don't like doing it because of the snow removal. So, we have this problem that we need to address. So I think saturation patrol, we don't want to have ticket allocations or, I don't like the big DWI mandatory stops. I think those are invasive. That's my opinion. We don't want drunks on roads. But, just to pull over everybody to get an eye check and where you going, that's just ridiculous in my opinion. So I'm with you. We don't want to be like I-40. I don't even like it when we're baiting out here on 70. You pull out there and there's ticket. I understand people coming into town once in a while, but the word spreads fast. Hey, slow your butt down.
So we were in a DWI council board meeting yesterday, and they were talking about the DWI roadblocks in town, and state police was saying that they wanted to do one here in the next month somewhere locally, but Sergeant Casson was saying that anymore the DWI roadblocks are a PR tool to basically shake hands and let them go through, because anymore with social media you're not ever catching anybody at DWI roadblocks. It's because they're letting hey, don't go down 48, don't go over here, don't go there. But it's just he was saying yesterday they're using it more as a PR tool as far as, the saturation stuff.
Well, and I know when they have them over here headed out to Alto, when they're starting to set up, my phone blows up on it. But as somebody that sells alcohol, my servers are licensed and we're responsible, and that's the first person they usually go after. Was the establishment, the person that overserved them and all that. We're keenly aware of that. And so if somebody thinks that a patron's becoming overserved, they alert me and we start making arrangements right then. The other is just, it just bottlenecks everybody up. And so, but you're saying that they're just saying, hello, carry on your way and moving on. Well, But why bother? If you're going to do a social campaign, I mean, there's other ways to do it. I just disagree with that whole philosophy. I don't want to see our people doing it. And I like the idea of outfitting our police officers with a bag full of Ruidoso pins with their cool logo on it or whatever. And, when somebody just basically makes a minor mistake, that we pull them over and ask them to drive friendly if they're not drinking, they're not beating their kid or their wife or something like that, and give everybody in the car a pin. That goes a long way.
But you're talking about that for Susan Lutterman as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you
Not
mean?
just the tourists?
I'm talking about everybody.
Everybody.
We don't know if you're from, half the tech people that live here still have Texas tags. And
I just want it to be the same for
it has to be the same.
Yes.
We're not stipulating tourists only, we're talking about everybody. Because we did do a check on tickets that were written not too many years ago, and it was about 50-50. Actually, it was a little over 50% local New Mexicans that were ticketed. The perception sometimes is that we're pulling over white license plates, but that's because there's so many of them in town at one point or another. But it has to be uniform. We do want them written when they need to be, but we're not looking for quotas. We're not looking for any of that.
So Mayor, I just want to bring up a couple of issues. So when you look at officers, sitting at the edge of the city limits on 70, is that something you think is acceptable? I mean, if there's areas of problems, like you brought up in the past on Holland, you've had complaints coming in there, but you can't get a police officer to go check it out.
No, we can't. I mean, I think some of those that we do need that officer sitting there. We put dummy cars over there. We've put the flashing speed limit deal over there. And after people figure out that there's no cop in the car, which doesn't take long, and then they see that, it does give them, they'll bump their brake. When I come down Hull, you ride the brakes.
Yep.
I mean, you have to put that gear shift down or you're riding your brake all the way down it.
Meacham, right there at Western Auto.
Yes.
Yes.
That goes from
I mean,
30 to, or 40 to 30.
Just because of the contour on the road in a lot of areas, because of the way the speed limit changes, hills, turns, there's obvious places that people, sometimes roll through a stop sign or whatever. But, sometimes the police officers are working those areas because they know that there's going to be an infraction there.
Well, sure.
And to me, that's kind of like targeting. Is that what we want to be doing in this community?
But like for school zones, I think it is good to have a police officer. It does slow you down and Sal is really good about parking his car, but I've watched it too many times, people running through those school zone and all of a sudden they see Sal's car and they slow down immediately.
Well, I mean, I was coming down Paradise Canyon, wasn't watching it, it's easy to speed. And all of a sudden these lights flash at me, just the headlights, and it was an officer. He could tell I was speeding. He didn't have me on radar, obviously. So I looked down and bumped the brakes. That kind of stuff I like that. It's like, hey, pay attention. You're watching for deer left and right. And some of these newer cars, man, you're flying before you know it. And, it's just a little bit of more, a friendlier way to police. But then there's sometimes we do need that officer parked there. To slow down. And, those streets that we're talking about, we've constantly, and it's always been, well, we don't have an officer we can set over there. But, that's what I get so frustrated, because the calls that I get from people on Hull and Wingfield, it's a specific time zone. They're going to work or they're coming home. It wouldn't take very much to set officer there, and then he's got some guy pulled over, which it's hard to pull somebody over. They're going to be in somebody's driveway or whatever. And you're there for 10 minutes writing the guy up. People are going to start slowing down, and then they're going to remember that.
And those are issues we can address, or that we will address, in the coming time.
Personally, just living off Hall, there are specific times when it's very difficult to get off Shadow Mountain Road and go left. I mean, because you have drop-offs, not so much now that school's out, but during that time, then you have the high schoolers that are rushing to get to class. And that's just a way of life, I guess. We could either do that or rename it Indy. I don't care, but you're right about the hill. they gain speed and they gain speed.
You know, because in my opinion, the only place that I would, target an officer to be there, or the driving, would be at the schools, because I see, a lot of people going fast, the buses, and we can actually, if we're there, we can actually help them with getting traffic moving a little more smoothly. So, that would be a spot that I would target, so to speak.
And I love it when your officers are walking through town, shaking hands, and a couple of these diesels that are locally owned and driven by young kids that we've talked about for years, that pull up that stop sign, or they come into Midtown and they hit that gas, blow the big ass smoke everywhere, and then they roll off laughing and giving the thumbs up, stuff like that. And then there's a Camaro in town, one of those, this thing's fast, and he's constantly doing that through Midtown. I get calls from, but it's, what was the license plate? It's the black one. It's the white
No,
truck with the
exactly.
two stacks.
Yeah.
Because you can't see them. And then when I call, well, did you see the individual in it? No, I got the phone call. And then you go to the Sweet Retreat, or whatever the name of that, Simple Sugars, or one of those, that you go in there and they look, man, they just blow by here. And so if we have an officer down there that can actually make a radio call, and you got an officer down here, hey, I want you to pull that guy over, and I'll be there in a minute. And you saw him, because that's what they always ask me. Did you see him? Well, did you have a radar? Oh, yeah. I don't have any of this stuff, so let him go on. So guess what? He didn't get nothing.
Or I didn't see him, so I can't do anything.
Exactly. And I get that a lot. Well, I didn't see him feed the horses. They didn't do it in my presence. But if your guys are down there, because we have that in Midtown a lot, they pull up to that center stoplight if they're headed west, and they frog that sucker off, and then they blow it all the way down until they get almost to Starbucks, and then they drop the speed. And I'll
Same
spend the
thing in town, with us doing the safe, Riddle's
Yes, sir.
Safe, right there. Well, it used to be Times Square, but everybody would stop at that stop sign, and then it's,
Yeah.
it's Indy.
So those are things I'd like to see, but as far as just trying to write tickets, if we have a presence, by presence, I think we mean visible.
I think so.
No, we're not pulling people over and writing them a ticket, but be out there so that people, they see, they remember, they look at their speedometer,
I think it's just more friendly too. I would like to see more friendly officer faces.
Yeah.
And with, the initiative going forward with the community policing, that is part of the development, that's part of the strategy, is once we implement those philosophies, it has to go down as far as even our FTO program, and make sure that our FTOs are evaluating these young officers, that cultivate them to put them in a community policing mindset, because it's not going to happen overnight. However, it will happen, and we'll just have to create that culture and rewrite policy. That's why, the accreditation position is very important, because once we get those policies solidified, we can start getting these officers into that mindset.
Yeah, we want more Andy Taylor and less Dirty Harry type stuff. But like they got the new officer in the Downs. He pulls people over constantly for taking a ride out of the racetrack area, and it's not a stop sign. But he's pulling them over to let them know, were they aware that they should have been slower? And all he's doing is fishing to see if you're drunk, or if you drank too much, or there's something. That's all he's doing, and I find that routinely offensive, but that's not our area. And then to have our officers drive through town, and that's what we want to know. What is code? How fast can they go over the speed limit? And like I told you about that Downs officer that was flying through town, and like an idiot, I got right up close to see I could see who he was to get his license plate number, and I told Chief about it. And then when he saw me kind of dropping back, and then he got into traffic, he's doing this stuff, trying to pass on the wrong side of the road. We got and it's just like he's throwing his hands out the window, like, hurry up, get the hell out. And then finally he got into Midtown, and it was like he knew he wasn't going anywhere, and he finally slowed down. But it was that young guy, he was just in a hurry. What was he doing in Ruidoso in a hurry?
And we get those complaints, and those are, once again, some of the things that I'll speak with Chief Scott about, in the future and talk about those things with him.
But to answer the manager's question, do y'all have anything specific?
No, I think in the long run, they're going to be working on all of this in the community policing, and that there was discussion years ago about from locals and from people, visitors to the area, that Ruidoso was supporting their budget by writing all these tickets and this and that and the other thing. That I agree, that's something that we don't want to be known at, but definitely there are people that do need to be written up as far as citation traffic and so on. But there is, of course, that let's just say reaching out, and not everybody really needs to get a ticket, warnings and such. But I've got total confidence y'all that y'all are going to be doing your community policing and your, let's just say, strict policing, and y'all will have the cognizance and also the discretion, let's just say, informed and experienced discretion in all of these matters. So I got confidence in y'all.
Thank you, sir.
And I would just cogently remind everyone that we receive a rather large block grant that is specific to DUI. So all I would ask is for regulatory compliance.
Yes, sir.
And remember years ago when I first got on council, that was a standard question that they would drag the chief up. How many tickets have we written this week, chief? For revenue purposes. And I found it you're saying we can't have a quota, but you're just telling him, we need to write more tickets, chief. And so we don't want to be that.
Absolutely not. And, fortunately, we're in a position that we don't have to rely on that as our sole revenue source for funding. So, I mean, we're blessed to have that in our favor.
I agree.
I do agree with the Midtown issue, because when you talk to all of the merchants, most of them, when you say what's your main concern, at least half of them will say the number one is public safety, the people in Midtown.
Pedestrian getting run over.
Yeah.
Yep. And the other thing, I've been contacted by numerous of the stakeholders, and they want to know our cops, they want to know our officers, and they want to, know them before they need them, and foster those relationships. So that is something that we will push forward, is to create those relationships, those strong ties with our stakeholders, so that way, we're all in a good position.
Because you can't see their faces in the cars, where you can't see anybody.
No,
You
I
can't.
agree.
Mayor, when this morning, and I don't know if you all watch the news or not, but on Channel 7, Albuquerque's talking about reinstituting those traffic cams. And, what we're talking about here is we got, limited personnel. We got quite a few streets. We do have quite a few roads that, act as secondary routes where people do speed. Is that a consideration to look at maybe some traffic cams? And, what I didn't like about the traffic cams and the way that they were being used before is that, I think they're using it as a revenue tool. But, I think if there was a way to screen it and say, at least send them a notice and say, we saw that you're speeding through this zone. Slow down. The next time we catch you on here, we're going to issue a citation, and use a different approach than what was being used before. But there are troubled areas that, I don't believe we need to look at installing speed bumps or speed humps. But is that something that you all may consider?
Well, and we're having to, because I've got addresses that people have been calling me for some time, and I've driven up and over them and talked to our road guys, and yeah, we can put one down, but we're going to have maintenance issues. We're going to, and then you look at, when you sit back in, it's not, that's what they'll tell me. You come by here between this time and it'll happen. And sure enough, you just pull over to the side of the road and you wait, and here they come. And it's like, wow, the speed that you can get, and then you're right there in a residential area. And so it becomes very concerning.
Mr. Mayor, if you could get me a list of those and, the times that they're alleging that
Okay.
these violations are happening, I will make sure that those areas get addressed.
I'll do it.
I think we need to look at alternative ways of doing that to where we're not impacting labor as well. Because I know that was part of the,
Yeah.
concern. And if we only have 2 or 3 guys, we may have 10 areas of concern. And I think once we start taking those different types of approach, and Mayor, I think you've been real big on community outreach. I think we need to educate ourselves on some of those different approaches, and then, kind of reach out to the community and say, if we can't address these things ourselves, this is what we're gonna do. Look at the pros and cons of some of those cameras or vehicles or whatnot.
Country club. People come through there, they get to coasting through. Lady was pulled over in the middle of the road right there at the turn that you drop off to Hull, looking at the horses.
Yeah.
And people are just coming up on her, and I'm trying to get around, and she's got the whole corner blocked, and she's just grinning from ear to ear, and she's got New Mexico tags.
Yeah.
And I was like, you need to pull up, move up. I had my window down, move on, and all these cars are just piling up. It's just a matter of time, but you come through there, people tend to speed through there. And then as they get into that residential area and they turn over off of Buckner, Kirkland, all those other areas, to jump over onto Meacham to get where they want to go faster. And that's the issues that we're having. And then when you got some tourists, somebody hadn't seen the horses before, that close up, then they stop, and then that's where you're going to have a problem.
Yes, sir.
And that's what worries me is how do we address those? It's going to take some, out of the box thinking with shortage.
DC, did you have something you wanted to say?
You have to just kind of jump in here because I just roll like the river, and I know it's.
Well, I've been listening to everybody, and part about listening is understanding what you want. And all of the concerns that we're talking about here all boils down to, leads down the path of community policing. All of these issues will be addressed through our process. The chief has spelled out that the priorities is our structure, which will give us a better chance to deal with a lot of these issues, make it more efficient on delegation of duties. It also holds us accountable to issues. And then our next issue is policies. The policies are the brain of the police department. And once we get all of these policies in line, that will help us create a better culture for the department. And that's what we're looking at, is we're needing to change the culture. Every issue that I've heard so far has to do with the culture of a department. And it's not going to be overnight, obviously. And so we have to do these things up front that the chief has made a priority to be able to handle and get to the point to what we want. And that is, the point is we want our officers to be the kind of officers that you'd be proud of in this village. And these things like going down the street with the window up, that's a culture thing. We need to teach the officers first, starting with FTO, hey, let's keep our windows down so we can be accessible to all of our citizens. So we can hear things, we can see things better. When you're making a traffic stop, it's not always about writing a citation, it's about changing their behavior. Well, changing their behavior doesn't mean you have to write them a citation.
Right.
It means that you find out what is going on with them right then and there. If you say, hey man, you need to slow down a little bit, coming through here, and they are cooperative, then maybe that will change their behavior. Well, let's say 2 days later, you stop the same person and they didn't slow down. Well, that didn't change their behavior then. So you have to come up with a new method, which may be writing them a citation. When you stop somebody that may or may not be a tourist in town, obviously there's a great chance that the person that you're stopping is a tourist. You evaluate the situation. Okay, oh, I'm so sorry, officer. We were looking for this restaurant that was over here, and I'm sorry that I missed that stop sign. Okay, normally running a stop sign is an egregious, act and it's dangerous and so forth. But can you talk to that person, make a PR situation and change their behavior by that way? All of these things that the chief is bringing forward is bringing us to that point that we want to get to. We just have to go up front and get all of these things changed first. So that way it will be successful for us to get that culture change.
Because, right now we have to build our foundation. And once that foundation is built with sound policies, a reorganization of the department, then we'll have a platform to shoot up,
Yeah, that sounds good.
It does.
Mayor, what I would recommend is that we take some of these ideas that we've talked about here. We're gonna add additional action items into the tactical plan. And then on the next regular agenda, we'll put this organizational chart and the amended tactical plan for the council's consideration.
Okay,
Okay?
that's very good.
Okay.
Okay. We don't need any action on it?
No, this is just discussion today. Ron, is there anything else that we didn't address?
Mayor Crawford, members of the council, I think we have everything that was listed on the agenda memo is been addressed.
Okay. So is that all the business that we have today? Anybody have anything else they want to bring up? Nope.
No.
Okay, being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.
Want those tickets now there, Manager Dodd?
I was hoping I would, but